there are extraordinary ships, and then there are ordinary ships with extraordinary legacies. And for today, I want to introduce you to one such ordinary ship that has left a lasting, extraordinary, and positive legacy. I'd like you to meet Kwinana. This humble ship began life in 1892. It would be the fourth ship built for a new Melbourne-based shipping company called the Curie Line. With them, it operated under the name of Darius. And as it was being built in the William Doxford and Sons shipyard, in that very shipyard, interesting things were happening. The shipyard had just completed its last ever sailing ship and was just about to embark on a massive building spree on a customized, specialized design that they had created. This design would go on to become known as the Doxford turret ship, which was a very distinctive vessel that would have its hull bent inwards and then upwards. Darius, however, was no such turret ship. It was the most ordinary ship you could ever think of. Very typical of the era. Typical standard passenger cargo steamer. Straight stem, counter stern, 2 masts, single funnel, and minimal superstructure. Entering service with the Curie Line, it had a very uneventful career. The company itself would be sold off. However, for Darius, in 1912, it was bought by a new enterprise in Western Australia. The Premier at the time, Premier Scadden, wanted to create a shipping company to service the remote communities. And this ship was picked up at £9,000. One of its crew members, the chief engineer, decided to migrate from the east coast of Australia over to the west, and so took his wife and infant son on board the Darius as the ship was transferred from the east coast of Australia over to the west. Remember this. The ship was given a refit. Its holds were strengthened so that it could carry 400 head of cattle. And the wife of the Premier at the time, who was pregnant, christened this ship Kwinana, which, in the language of the indigenous people, meant pretty maiden. Kwinana would begin a series of ships that would service Western Australian communities for the next 5 to 6 decades. This company was unimaginatively called the State Shipping Service. And almost all the ships would have K names. Kulama, Kulinda, Kwinana. For the next 8 years, Kwinana operated on its new run along the West Australian coast. World War I didn't affect it as much since it was operating on a mandatory run. It had to provide this service to the local communities, so it could not be spared. And at the end of the First World War, the ship continued doing what it always had done. However, on Christmas Day 1920, a fire broke out in the forward hold. Initially it wasn't serious and the fire was put out, but then it broke out again. And this time, the fire got worse. By the end of the week, the ship had to be towed into port. Its forward hold was completely destroyed and its upper superstructure was completely burnt out. Due to the warpage of the heat and due to the amount of firewater put into the ship, it settled on the harbour bottom. The good news is that the stern of the ship, and more importantly the engines, were undamaged. So once the water was pumped out, the Kwinana was able, under its own steam, to return back to Fremantle. The ship being almost 30 years old, it was decided that it wasn't worth repairing, and so it was stripped of parts. And it essentially sat as a hulk for 2 years, until a great big storm ripped away its mooring cables, and it was thrust upon an abandoned beach. It sat there on this beach for the next couple of decades, its metal slowly being cut away, and by 1941 most of its hull and upper works were completely removed. And the area, as it would slowly develop, took on the name Kwinana. And this area continues to be known by that name. Kwinana also gave its name to a state highway, to one of the state's largest grain terminals. To this day, it continues to be an industrial hub and has recently announced that the area will be expanding as well. The wreck would be concreted over, and to this day, you can see some photos up here, you can actually walk along, and at low tide you can jump down and still see bits of the hull of the Kwinana sticking out. Most distinctively is, of course, the rudder stock, and this image is of the rudder stock with the grain terminal bearing the Kwinana's name in the background. Now, to take the legacy back to a personal level, the wife of the premier who launched the Kwinana, she gave birth to a daughter. That daughter was named Marjorie Kwinana. And that lady ended up marrying the son of the engineer that took the Kwinana from the east coast over to the west. And their story and much information about the Kwinana can be found in this book, Pretty Maiden, by R.A. Nairn, who was the son of the engineer and who married the premier's wife. Also, if you find stories of Australian shipwrecks interesting, and not just this one, but may I also recommend to you this book that I have written, and you can find a link for this down below as well. As I said, some ships are just ordinary but leave behind extraordinary legacies or seem to be surrounded by extraordinary events. Here is one ship whose name continues to live on in areas and in fields that were just unimaginable when it first entered service. And as an added bonus, you can still walk on this wreck.